Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of Science of Successful Living. I'm Asar, your facilitator, and we are here each and every Sunday morning. You can find us on the Zoom channel, the Zoom in the Zoom room, or if you are on a user of YouTube, you can go to the YouTube channel, which is Oasis Spiritual Center. But I hope that each of you, as you join me, that you are connecting in a way that allows me to get the email out to you. That way you can be notified whenever a teaching goes live. I hope this message finds you well this morning. I'm excited that you have chose to tune in to today's Science of Successful Living seminar or lecture. I have a thought-provoking, enlightening lecture to present to you today, and it's entitled From Education to Self-Determination, Unveiling the Path to Success. So I want to present some profound insights that I've gathered from three influential books over my life, and I'm going to share those books with you. Each of these books have a unique perspective on the empowerment and self-determination of people of African descent. These books that I want to share with you this morning explore the significance of understanding history, culture, spirituality, in the pursuit of success and self-discovery. So that's what Science of Successful Living is all about. Speaking specifically to people who are of African descent, but with truths that even if you're not of the African descent or don't acknowledge that you can apply these truths and you'll find yourself being successful through life. Now, I say acknowledge African descent because I believe all mankind comes from Africa, and because of time and because of the impact of the environment, we have the variance that we have today. But the foundation of all mankind, science has proven to be on the continent of Africa. So the three books that I want to share with you today, and they are The Africans at the Crossroads, is a book that was written by Dr. John Henrik Clarke. Book two is The Miseducation of the Negro, is a book written by Carter G. Woodson, and it was originally published, I believe, right around 1933. And then the last book that many of you may not be familiar with is called The Yurugu, an African-centered critique of European cultural thought and behavior. It was a book written by Marimba Ani. And so those are three books that I'm going to kind of introduce to you this morning. At some point, I would encourage you to put them in your library. If your only book that's in your library is the Bible, then you are going to find yourself having a lot of challenges, and you won't really be able to personally fully self-actualize as a person of African descent. Because when you look at the purpose behind the compilation of what we call the Holy Bible, it was not compiled with you and I in mind. So my concern is that we refuse to look at the spiritual miseducation, and I believe there's primarily three reasons why we're not addressing spiritual miseducation, and one of which is the desire to hold on to what has become sacred to us, the desire to hold on to that which has been passed down to us by those we love, those we trust, and that which we are familiar with. The second reason I believe that we refuse to look at the spiritual miseducation that we've undergone is we have men and women of the cloth who are our preachers, our teachers, our evangelists, our prophets, some of which have gone through the seminaries, some of which are self-taught, and they refuse to look at the fact that what has been given to them was a story, and the narrative that is given to us is the narrative that produces our own beliefs, that controls how the story we tell. And so we must be kind of, I think we should be suspicious of the narrative that was given to us by those who enslaved us. the narrative that has been given to the world by those who want to control the world. And so I want you all to begin to grow up and to examine what you believe. Once you examine what you believe and know it to be true, then you move from just sheer believing to a knowingness. And that's how you are successful in life. When you know you can do something, you can do it. If you think you can do it, there's a good chance you may do it, but there's a probability that you won't because you think you can. But no, you got to know you can. And the third reason why I believe that we refuse to look at the spiritual miseducation that is taking place in our community is it's the retelling the story. Okay, so we have some who are retelling the story, but not expressing the truth that it's a story. There's a group, so you got the conscious community that, pretty for the most part, that says you need to throw that whole thing out, the baby in it all. You got those individuals who just are saying, don't get into, sister, don't get into that conversation. All you need is Jesus. All you need is the Bible. And a lot of times that pushes some of us further down the path. But at the same time, then you have that other group who is saying, then you have that group that has unpacked this stuff and can give you the proof. And then you have that group that is believers who are pastors, and they want to pull in these truths, but they also want to adulterate it with the lies that they've been holding on to. And there's a project called the Jude Project, where these are a group of theologians who are positioning themselves against the truths that the Kemetic teachers are bringing out. The truth being that Christianity that has been presented to us is an adulterated version of the Nile Valley or ancient African spiritual systems. And they don't want you to know that, because if you really grasp that, that means there's a level of accountability to them that they either have to reformat what they're giving or shut up. And most of them don't want to reformat it, and they don't want to shut up. So they continue to pull in truths, but at the same time, hold on to lies. So I'm not going to go deeper into that this morning, but that's the reality of the situation. How you like my backdrop this morning? I put the picture there of what appears to be a person on the cross, but it's a black man, and so that's a big step in a positive direction for a lot of churches that have a black Jesus. But then I say that is only a start, because when you begin to delve into that, you begin to see the disappearance of the historical Jesus, but you hold on to the message of the man, the message of this character. So let's look at these books. The first book that I want to kind of just introduce you to is called Africans at the Crossroad. Again, this book was written by Dr. John Henrik Clarke, and he's a prominent historian and scholar of African history and culture. Now, I had the distinct pleasure of meeting him in person a number of times when he came to Chicago to a couple think tanks, not really knowing the magnitude of who he was and what the impact he had on the cultural community. I was glad to know that I got to hear him and see him up close and personal. So in this book, Dr. Clarke explores the challenges and opportunities facing people of African descent, not just African Americans, but Africans in the diaspora, Africans on the continent. I like that he looks at the state of the African, not just saying African Americans or Africans that are in the diaspora, but all Africans. The book delves into the historical context of African civilizations, their contributions that they've made to world history, and the impact of slavery, the enslavement, and the colonialism has had on African societies. And that's something we fail to really look at, fail to really explore, because the narrative that is being given to us is being given to us by our schools of higher learning, by the school boards that don't represent the highest and greatest good of the community that is sitting in the classroom. So they are taking these truths in a very overt way out of the school. He argues that a reconnection with our heritage and culture as a means of empowerment and self-determination for people of African descent is necessary. You cannot be successful if you do not totally accept your full self. I know individuals who appear to be successful, but they have what Dr. Cambone would say, they have an alien self disorder. They have no idea of who they are. And if you don't know yourself, if you don't love yourself, then you can never really present fully who you are. So, through a combination of historical analysis and cultural insights, Africans at the Crossroad calls for a renewed sense of identity, unity, and agency among Africans and African descendants. It's not about putting anyone else down or attacking anyone, but it's becoming self-centric, looking at what represents our highest and greatest good. In this book, he emphasizes the importance of understanding your history, your heritage as a foundation for addressing the challenges and the opportunities of the modern world. For too many of us, we define ourselves just within contemporary history. We define ourselves based on what has happened recently. But I think if you really want to get a good sense of who you are, you have to go back as far as you can in antiquity. Now, that presents a problem for many African Americans because we over identify with the fact that we have been here 400 years and we have been we've acculturated, and we pretty much a big part of the fabric. So I embrace my African Americanness, the fact that I'm born on this continent, have been influenced by this continent, but I also realize the core of who I am, at my genetic structure, I'm an African. And so I embrace that. So that's a book I really encourage you to get a hold of. Go through it, when you get the time. But the second book is really an important book. It's a book that I encourage everyone to have on their shelf, particularly if you are a minister, if you are a coach, if you are a doctor, if you are helping, if you're in the helping profession, you need to be familiar with this book. The Miseducation of the Negro is a book that was written by Carter G. Woodson published in 1933. So the term Negro was apropos for the contemporary times in which he wrote it. Overall, Dr. John Henry Clarke's book encourages us to reflect on our African roots and find it as a source of strength. Whereas when we look at Carter G. Woodson's books, he addresses the issues of how African Americans were historically and systematically miseducated in the United States. And it still goes on today. We are systematically, and that means it's intentionally done. When you look at, even in theology, systematically, they focus on the Greek, the Hebrew, the Latin, and even if they focus on the Latin and take that to its truest origin, you find that that's an African language. So what we have to understand, that this is a very purposeful attempt to guide the thinking process of individuals. So miseducation. So as we've been miseducated in the traditional schools of higher learning, we've been miseducated inside of the religious systems, particularly Christianity. That's what I'm focusing on. There has been a spiritual miseducation that we must begin to contend with. In Woodson's book, he contends that African Americans, students were often taught a curriculum that downplayed their heritage and potential. We see that still going on today. We see the African American studies or the African studies departments are dwindling. There was a big push in the 60s and 70s, and we saw the advent of the African studies departments showing up on all the campuses across America. You can get a major in African studies, but now it's dwindling because it never caught on beyond, those who are African descent. Very few people who are was of non-African descent were taking those classes. And I believe that if you're in a helping profession and you're going to be helping people of African descent, you should have had a core group of classes that has to do with the re-educating of the individuals on the African experience. That's really important. So in his book, he emphasizes the importance of African Americans learning their true history and culture to develop a strong sense of self and self-worth and identity. So that's something that we can all benefit from. Overall, the miseducation of the Negro is a critical examination of the educational system's role. This is 1933, and it's still appropriate today. The miseducation and its role in perpetuating racial inequality, a call for African Americans to take control of their own education. And not only our own education, but we need to take control of our spiritual lives. We must no longer allow the traditions of men to be overlaid on us and be the filter through which we seek our oneness with Source. We have to begin to stop using terms like God and get more African centered and specific, and realize that Source is represented in nature. And that's why the ancient Nile Valley community would often use natural things, nature. That's where we get the netters, which the Egyptians gave to the world, but the world took it and called it God. But there's different aspects to Source. And so they found wind, earth, fire were aspects, but they weren't God. So we must be willing to redefine what spirituality is. That's really important. When you look in his book, Carter, his book remains a significant work, even though here we are in 2023 and it was written in 1933. The study of African American education and identity is still something that has yet to be drilled down into. Woodson does discuss several themes in this book, and he has there's I would say 10 things I want to pull out from the book. He talks about the role of curriculum. So if you're an educator, Woodson criticizes how African American history and contributions were marginalized or omitted from the curriculum, leading to a distorted view of history. And so most of us do have a distorted view of history, a distorted view of biblical history, a distorted view of the African cosmological stories. So we must look at the curriculums that are being presented to us. The second thing he pulls out in this book is the impact of Eurocentrism on the world. The Western worldview has impacted the world at large. Inside his book, he highlights how Eurocentric education perpetuates the idea of African inferiority and the supremacy of European culture. Now, this is true because when you look at it, the worldview that has been imposed on us, they impose it on it because they believe they have the preeminent worldview. And so we have to begin to move away from having a westernized Eurocentric worldview to having a worldview that is African centered. Now, if you go to China, they have a worldview that is centered in their culture, centered in their continent. If you go to any place where the indigenous people have not totally been impacted by outside influences, they have a centrific worldview. And we must take on a centrific worldview. The advantage of taking on an African centered worldview is that it's universal. When you really study African history, you find that we have influenced the world because the world comes from Africa. And we fail to grasp that because we've been so heavily influenced by Eurocentric thought. The other thing he talked about is the importance of self-knowledge. Woodson, he stresses the need for Africans to rediscover and embrace their true history and heritage to build self-esteem and identity. So once we begin to do that, we move away from having an alien self identification, that we have the identification that is steeped inside of where we come from and the place that represents us. He talks in this book about economic disparities. He discusses how miseducation perpetuated economic disparities and limited opportunities for African Americans, which is still being played out today. So it's a really good book. He talks about the influence of media and popular culture. He critiques how media and popular culture further the stereotypes and misconceptions about African Americans. Now, we've taken that over and taken it on ourselves. When we look at how we're presented in the media, we're not presented in the highest and greatest light that we can. We're presented as athletes. We are presented as entertainers. We're presented as comedians. We are not being presented in the fullness of who we are. So our children are seeking to become those things versus becoming that which they were, what they agreed to come here to do, be, and express as. Because success is based on the number of likes you get. Success is based on perhaps the car you drive. So all of those accoutrements come with success, but they're not the definition of success. He talked about, which I've enjoyed this part of the book, the role of religion. So what has happened today, instead of people saying they're religious, they're saying they're spiritual. But that's all they've done is change the language. Many people who say they're spiritual are still very much religious. In this particular part of the book, he examines how religion sometimes played a role in reinforcing the status quo and limiting critical thinking. When I look at the role of Christianity, when you get into critical conversations, you will find many Christians will resort to just saying, well, I believe, or all I know is Jesus, all I need is the Bible. That is ignorance. That is very ignorant, because if all you needed was the Bible and all you needed was Jesus, well, why do you have an insurance plan so when you get sick in your body, you was one of the first people to run and get the shot. Now, I have no problem if anyone has chose the shot, but look at what you're saying. If you're one who is saying, all I need is Jesus, okay, Jesus take the wheel. If you're saying that all I need is the blood of Jesus, but when the rubber hits the road, your behavior does not align with what you're stating. And so we must really begin to look at, is there anything behind what we're professing? So when we talk about the role of religion, religion is the opiate of the masses. That's the psychiatrist Fanon, African psychiatrist by the name of Fanon, Fanon. He says that religion is the opiate of the masses. And you know what an opiate does, okay? And so and we have found that it helps people escape. It helps people to not deal with the realities. But true spirituality empowers you to deal with reality and shift reality. That's what this presentation is all about. The science of successful living, to move you from just having a religious conversation to putting it to work, and that way you'll have a spiritual practice that empowers you, not limits you. And he talks about that in the role of religion. He talks about the importance of higher education, discussing the value of higher education in empowering African Americans to challenge the status quo. Those who have gone to school should begin to challenge the status quo, but they don't challenge the status quo because they've been acculturated, because they've taken on the teachings and the narrative of the Western um, mindset or the Eurocentric influence. And so what you have is a black white man. You have a black man that's communicating, that is sharing a Eurocentric view, or a white or black woman. So we have leaders who look like us, may walk like us, talk like us, dress like us, live amongst us, but their worldview is dis-ease. It's a dis-easing thing. It doesn't really prepare us to totally self-actualize. Now, the reason why, now you ask some of your professors, ask some of your doctors, ask some of your professionals, particularly if you're dealing with black psychologists, black social workers, black healthcare workers. Ask them, have they ever taken a class that was specific to dealing with people of African descent? Have they ever taken a class that presented an African-centered perspective on the topic? Very few of them. I know tons of African American, African psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, and I chuckle when I talk to them, and I will ask them, are you part of ABPSI, the Association of Black Psychologists, or are you part of the Black Social Workers? Many of them are not even part of the associations that represent Black people. They are still part of the normative communities. And so I ask them these questions, and they say they've never taken a class, or they didn't know anything like that existed. That person will not be treating me. That person will not be assisting me in any way. I'm going to ask you, what do you know about Black people? What do you know about people of African descent? We are all not the same. If we were all the same, then we'll all be the same color. The very truth of the matter, because I am this hue, that tells me there's something in me different than someone who is of another hue. So we got to start putting some thought behind the things we say. He also addressed the role of leadership. He emphasized the need for a strong African American leader who can advocate for change and progress. Most of our leaders, they may go in with the intent, but once they get into the system, they become acculturated to it. They come into the realization that by themselves, they can't change the system. And so the leadership has to stand up. And if you really stand up as a Black leader, you're going to be ostracized. You're going to be perhaps even assassinated. When we look at Dr. Martin Luther King, now his narrative was changing over the years, and there was an assassination that was associated with how his mind was changing. When we look at Huey P. Newton, the Black Panther Party, as a leader, ultimately he was assassinated. Really, when you look at what happened in his life, when you look at Malcolm X, he was assassinated because these were strong voices that were standing up and not just repeating the narrative that has been given by the predominant culture. Now, most importantly, he talks about the role of teachers. He discusses the influence of teachers in shaping beliefs and attitudes in students. I recently had an encounter with someone who has been following the podcast, and they said that they were a teacher and they was teaching Sunday school, and they was having conflict because they were aware that the truths that they had come in contact with wasn't being taught to the students, and so they chose to stop teaching. And I told them that represented integrity. You got to have integrity as a teacher to say, I'm not going to continue to perpetuate lies. I'm going to sprinkle in, I'm going to pour in, I'm going to present truths to those who sit before me as students. And many preachers don't do that. Many pastors don't do that. And I talk specifically about that because I was behind the veil. I know what goes on behind the veil. I know more than the person that's sitting in the pew. I know what the pastors say behind. I know the pastors know this stuff. I know they're choosing not to share this stuff. And you know why they don't share this stuff? Because of their pockets. Because the pews probably will begin to think and begin to say, well, if that's a lie, how much more of this is a lie? So they just feel like I'll continue to preach what I preach, because if I don't preach this and I preach the truth, there's a good chance that the offering plate will be down. And this is real. People who are, remember in the movie, um, uh, um, Malcolm X, there was a point when he said, "What's your angle, preacher? What's your racket?" And for many people, it's a racket. Now, they didn't come into it to because they thought it was a racket or a get rich quick thing, but they come to the realization what I'm teaching is not totally truth, has been adulterated, and they don't have the integrity enough to say to the congregation, you know what, I've come across some information and I'm doing a study, and I did this. Now, I didn't bring it totally to my congregation, but I began to study to show myself approved, a workman who would not be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. And there came a point where I had to suddenly let the reveal and let people choose to do what they want to do. Now, a large part of the church ultimately moved on, but a large part of the church came to the church because they knew I had a message that was different from that was being presented by the masses. And so for over 30 years, it took me 30 years to get where I'm at today. It took me 30 years to finally say that that's a lie, that the Bible is not the unadulterated word of God. That was difficult to get to. It was difficult to get to the fact that I don't have to use the term God to represent the creator, because they're not oftentimes one and the same. But I use language of the people who I engage. But I understand, because I've been behind the veil, what they mean when they say God. But as they grow, come alongside of me, I encourage you, don't use the term God. Why? Because when you use the term God that is given to you, if you look at the origins of the word, if you exegete it and look at it, it comes from, it's a German word. And so it's not even a word that goes into antiquity. And so that's why I prefer to use the terms like source, the divine intelligence, and I'll even use capital IT, to describe it. And that's not to take anything away from or being sacrilegious, but you can't really define source. Source is all that you define and more. So we have roles as teachers. And then lastly, he talks about the need for cultural awareness in this book. He advocates for an education that acknowledges and celebrates the cultural diversity. And I'm the same way. So you can't see God because you can't see source, because source is a spirit. You can feel it. But it shows up in me, as you. And for me not to deal with your blackness, your culture, then that's for me to be disingenuous. That's for me to continue to play into the narrative. Now, I am not my skin, I'm not my hair, I'm not my height, but I show up inside of those things. Those are my representatives. And I must acknowledge my representatives, because I chose to come and show up in this body. And so I want you to be no longer be ashamed, and don't allow that narrative to be put out there that God is invisible, source is invisible, you should be invisible. You are invisible. You are a divine spiritual being dropped into this human body to be. Because so that's important. So he has these points that he puts in this book. There are like 10 of them, and I encourage you to read that book. Now, the last book that many of you may not be familiar with, and it's entitled, matter of fact, I have a copy of it right on my desk, and I'm gonna see if you could see it here. It's called the Urugu. Let me see what I can move where you can see. There it is, the Urugu, an African-centered critique of European cultural thought and behavior. It's a pretty thick book. I've had it for quite some time. Now, what you might say, why do you have all these books? Well, because by nature, by profession, I'm a therapist, a mental health professional. I have a master's in counseling psychology, and so I had to go down another path because once I got my degree in '87, I found that I was not totally equipped to deal with the population that I was dealing with. 90% of the people that I was dealing with were of African descent. And so I had never had a class in Black psychology, and I began to, self-study. I began to read books, purchase books. That's how my library grew. And through all of that, it helped me to redefine not only my position as it pertains to delivery of service, but it also helped me to redefine my spiritual life, because the word psychology comes from the Kemetic word saku, the study of the soulish aspects of the being. For the Western practitioner, it's the study of behavior. They study what they can see, what they can measure. But for the African, for the Commissions, it was the study of the saku. It was understanding the transformation of individuals. And so that's when you talk about the African cosmological story, the African tree of life. It's talking about how do you transform from being a mere human being to being a divine being. How do you reach the Amen state? How do you reach the Asar state or the Aset state? How do you go from being Haru, the child of God, to God itself? So that's important. So in the Urugu, written by Marimba Ani, a Black psychologist, which critically examines European culture or Western thought and the impact that it has on the world. You're going to find in this book, she discusses various aspects of the African-centered spirituality, how it differs from the Eurocentric perspective of spirituality. She argues that African-centered spirituality is rooted in a deep connection to nature. And this is true. Community and ancestral wisdom, not ancestral worship, but ancestral wisdom. It emphasizes the interconnectedness of all living beings, not just Black people, but all people, and the importance of maintaining harmony with the natural world. So when we look at the world today, Western culture does not harmonize with nature. And as a result, we see nature is revolting. Inside of African-centered spirituality, it involves rituals, ceremonies, and practices that honor where you come from, honor your ancestors, and spiritual forces of the universe. Now, people talk about ancestral worship. But when you look in the scripture, it says, honor your mother and your father, that your days may be long in the earth. And when it talks about your mother and your father, it's not talking about as long as they are alive, but the wisdom that they have imparted in you. So in contrast, Eurocentric spirituality, as critiqued in this book, is often portrayed as a hierarchical, individualistic, male-oriented, disconnected from nature, all about things. It is seen as emphasizing power and control over the environment, over other human beings. Even in the scripture itself, the Bible, which they lean into, it says that he created man in his image after his likeness, and he gave him dominion over the fish of the sea, the fowl of the air, and every creeping thing that creeped upon the face of the earth. Nowhere in it does it say that man has dominion over another man. So the enslavement does not even align with their scriptures. And for those of you who say a woman who is subservient to, or a woman is supposed to serve a man, that is also perpetuated by a Western worldview, a Western interpretation. You don't serve no one. You align with, you work with, but you don't serve. No one owns you, and you own no one. Your children come through you, not to you. You don't own your children. They come to you. But see, that's an African worldview. They understood that this child comes to me because this is the only portal by which this child could enter into this world as a human being. Now, overall, we got to understand that she suggests that the Eurocentric spirituality has played a significant role in colonization and domination of other cultures and has contributed to the exploitation of natural resources and even the exploitation of the world's greatest resource, which is human beings. And we have to take it upon ourselves to say that we will no longer be part of a system that exploits us. That's important. When you look at the Yurugu, this book encourages the reader to reevaluate your understanding of spirituality and consider the perspectives of the African-centered spirituality as a potential alternative to the Eurocentric worldview. When you look at the image that you saw in the that I sent out today, in that image you saw a picture of the three heads, and beneath the three heads it said, there was a comment. It says slavery is still alive. It may not be over. It may not be overt, but it is covert. You can take the chains off, but if you have relegated that person to only going so far with that chain, when you take that chain off, they will only still go so far. So you have to understand has taken place a systematic depreciation of people of African descent at our expense. So this book encourages you to have a deeper appreciation for the interconnectedness of all life and the importance of living in harmony with nature and one another. So it's not a book that's written to tell you to go out and destroy someone or to do unto you to them as been done unto you. No, these books that I have just shared with you is about you transforming your life. No longer can we have this conversation about being great, about being divine spiritual beings, without looking at the elephant that is in the room. What is getting in the way of you walking as a divine spiritual being? One is the cloak that you're in. That is your physical bodies. So you have to learn how to bring your physical body under subjection to the divineness of who you are. No, I'm not my hair, my hands, my feet, and the things I eat. But I must understand, if those things get in the way of me expressing divinely, I must address them. And if you've been told that if you black, get back, if you're white, you're right, then you will find that that gets in the way of you really showing up boldly. So we got to deconstruct some of the destructive things we've been given, some of the things we've continued to read, some of the things we continue to say, and what turns my antenna up anytime I hear a person say, all I need is Jesus. I say, how that's working for you? Or when a person is in a situation, somebody will say to them, get you some Jesus. Well, how's it working for you in your life? Oh, maybe today things are all right, but when you had a situation and you couldn't get well, did you use Jesus plus? So I'm saying we must really begin to hold people accountable. Don't let people subject you to something that is not even true to them. That's really important to me. As a spiritual teacher, as a spiritual guide, as a facilitator of conversations to lead people to greater expression, we must deal with the Africans in the room. One of the books that I'm relooking is a book that I bought some years ago, and it's written by Dr. Asa G. Hilliard, and that book is entitled The Reawakening of the African Mind. Okay, I encourage you, those of you who are serious, consider getting this book, The Reawakening of the African Mind. Saba, good book. It talks about comprehending why education is critical to the African liberation, the re-educating, everything about educating. Now, the word educate, it comes from the word educe, to bring forth. Most of our educational systems is about putting into, miseducating you, putting something in you. So we must learn to be still and know. We must know that everything we need to know is available to us and is in us. And we must be willing to be still, get quiet, and to identify the beliefs, the thoughts that do not represent our highest and greatest good. So that's my message this morning to you. That's my word to you this morning, that we have to reclaim our true identities from miseducation to self-determination, unveiling the path of success. If you don't know who you are, you can never become who you were designed to be. That is important. Awesome, good. So what I like to do, we get a dialogue going here, but before I do that, every Sunday I do make space for the law of circulation to go into place. Now, what do I mean by the law of circulation? That is, give and it shall be given to you. And that also means that we understand that if you are engaging someone that gives value to you, you show appreciation by taking care of that bill and tipping them. No, I'm not asking you to tip me, but I am asking you that if you found value in this morning's conversation, consider sowing a seed, not because I have a need, not because of greed, but sow the seed in appreciation for what you just received. So I want you to participate this morning with me in our offertory, and this is how I do it. Take in your hand, in your mind's eye, what you would love to sow to this ministry. And you say, in my hand, I hold my seed. I sow my seed, not for greed. I sow my seed because it prospers me, because I operate inside of the laws, the universal law of circulation. So divine love through me blesses and multiplies all that I am, all that I have, and all that I give, and all that I receive. So I sow this morning. Circulate, circulate, circulate. So how do you sow to this morning to the ministry? You can, if you're using Zelle or if you're using Cash App, you can simply punch in the phone number 708. Okay, that's 708 368 1076. Somebody can punch that in there. 708 368 1076. Now, if you don't use Cash App or Zelle, you can go to the website, oasisspiritualcenter.com. oasisspiritualcenter.com. Over to the giving tab, you'll find various ways in which you can transmute what's in your hand into the ministry. So I say thank all of you who are participating. Now, for those who are participants in the offertory, you will get on a monthly basis, you will get a special newsletter that has to do with helping you move from a paradigm of poverty to a paradigm of prosperity. Okay, and that's for those who give. I just feel appreciative, and that's how I show my giving. If you're brown, stick around. That's right. And you possibly can get down. That's my mom said. So any questions? What I want to do is open the floor up. We have about 5 minutes available. For those of you that's with me this morning, if you got a question, you can type it over in the feed, or if you on the Zoom room, you can raise your hand. Good to see all those who have participated this morning. I hope something has been said that was uplifting, encouraging, and challenging, causing you to say, so I'm looking here, 708, somebody was typing in a number, but let me type that number in there so they don't get it wrong. 708 36 10 6. That's the number you can use if you want to sow into this ministry. Again, I'm asking any questions, any aha moments, anything you want to share this morning as we prepare to wrap up another session of the science of successful living. Okay, let me see here. So I'm looking to see if I got any hands. Okay, Alan, good to see you, Alan. Good morning, Alan. You have the mic.
Good morning. I really enjoyed your presentation today.
Awesome.
I have kind of a question, not necessarily. Yesterday I was out and I ran across a young lady, and she told me that she was a metaphysical teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And then I asked her, does she know about New Thought? And then she asked me, what is New Thought? So is metaphysics and New Thought, is that the same, or is there a difference? Or if you can guess,
Okay, so here's
briefly guess at me.
excellent thing. So, do you think she was asking you from the place of inquisitiveness, or was she being funny? Because New Thought and metaphysics, if somebody says there's a metaphysical teacher, they are a New Thought teacher. So,
But that's what I was thinking. But
mhm.
then when I asked her about New Thought, she said, what is New Thought? So then I was just kind of like, okay, so listening to you, and that's what I was thinking. But she said that she didn't even know what New Thought was.
Okay, good. So let me, for those of you in my listening audience, when a person say they are a New Thought thinker or a New Thought teacher, or they go to a New Thought church, basically what they're saying to you is they are either identifying with the science of mind, which is Ernest Holmes, or they're religious science, Ernest Holmes, or they're dealing with the divine science, which is another New Thought branch, or their unity churches, Charles Fillmore. So those are the three like denominations, if I would, of New Thought thinkers. But all New Thoughts are metaphysical in their teaching. That is, they don't take the Bible literally, but they take it as metaphors, and that they also teach on a deeper level. So when the person says, and so example, a traditional pastor will say that he's a deep teacher, but he's teaching you based on the literalness of the Bible. Whereas when a person says they are a metaphysical teacher, they are usually inside of the 12 universal laws. They are usually are looking at things not at face value, but is what's behind it, what is what is showing up in the physical, but what is it saying in the spiritual realm. So you find a lot of people who are metaphysical in the Black community may not be associated with the three traditional New Thought churches. So like this ministry, the New Thought Center is a New Thought from the perspective of it takes old thought and reflect it in a new way. We take ancient wisdom, ancient teachings out of Africa, and we incorporate it in our lives, making it a new thought. But there's nothing new under the sun. So your question is, are they one and the same? Yes, they are one and the same, but at the same, well, the foundationally, metaphysically is beneath all of them, but is expressed like the metaphysician may not have a particular spiritual community that they align with. Whereas when a person says they are a New Thought, they usually have a spiritual community they align with, like divine science or religious science, or the unity churches. And for those of you who are part of this community, it's the just New Thought Center. Okay, and that's what it's about.
Thank you.
How was that?
That was good. I appreciate you. I got her.
That's what's up, my brother. That's what okay. Good. Good morning. Carolyn, you have the mic.
Good morning, Asar. All is well.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is. You're decreeing it as such.
Yes, indeed. Yes, yeah. Indeed. And so it is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So my question this morning is, okay, I'm being challenged this morning. All right. I'm taking these lessons as in the scripture when it says, verily, verily. I've learned that, when source keeps bringing something before me, then that means I really need to look at this thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I mentioned to you some time ago, the question came in my spirit, do you know who you are, right? And my answer to yes, I know who I am. It was revealed to me that's what you are. And right. What you are and who you are totally two different things. So in your teaching this morning, it's really taking me back to look and see, okay, if you're asking me who I am, then evidently what I thought I was or who I thought I was is not what I am. And I'm looking to Oh God. Break through the barrier of the Western thought and not be afraid to go into the unknown. Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense. So,
okay, this is my question though. When I was doing my master's, we had this class called Hebrew Bible, right? And in this class, there were all kinds. There were Hebrew Israelites, there were Muslims, there were African Americans, there was Catholic, there was all of us, right? And but every time I would come in the room, the Muslims would say, or come into class, the Muslims would say, "We welcome the prophet. Here comes the prophet." Or either they would say, "The teacher has come," right? I never discussed what my faith was with any of them. And in one discussion, one of the African American students was talking, and the Muslim guy just looked at him and he said, "I will be so glad when you are free." And so I asked him the question, "What makes you know that he's not free?" And he said, "Because free men don't talk like that." Oh God, so that sent me back. So I had no comment. I didn't comment to the class. I didn't comment on that comment. But after the class, I asked the Muslim, "What did he say?" And he said, "Because free men don't ask for permission." Oh. And in your teaching this morning, when you say, we have been so indoctrinated, even though the chain is off, we still won't go outside that limit. We still have to get permission to go outside that boundary that's been set for us. So my question, Asar, this morning is, why is it that it only seems that the African American culture are the only ones that seem compelled to stay inside of boundaries that another culture has set for it?
Well, the answer is, remember I said systematic. So this thing has been a system that has been set up with the goal of subjugating an entire people to being at the disposal of such a small group of people. And with that being said, what has happened, they've done such a great job that they tied it to religion, they tied it to spirituality. And we no way would think that someone who is presenting something that is sacred would be presenting something that is really set up to destroy you, to distract you from who you are. So when we look at, now, some of it was intentional. So, okay, let me hear something for everybody. You need to get a timeline. You need to draw a line. Okay, you can get maybe a huge piece of paper and you draw a line, a horizontal line. And halfway that line, you put 0. And then you start putting 100, 200, and then you can go 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. So we're only at the 2,000s after the 0. But then if you go beyond the 0, I want to see how far you can go back. That which has been given to us in the way of Christianity, Islam, Catholicism, if you put them on the 0 line, traditional Christianity, which we know, is at 300 AD. Okay, let's use that. The Christianity that we have presented to us in 300 AD can be traced back to 300 BC Christianity. Now, I'm trying to put some things in a time strength line for you. And that's when the Ptolemies, or the Greek influence inside, Greek and Roman influence inside of Egypt. So at 300 BC, Egypt is no longer, Kemet is no longer ruled by indigenous people, Africans. They're now ruled by foreigners who have come in, usurped all of the great libraries, taken the information, maybe sat in the classes, gotten part of the information, and now they begin to create their own system, and it's based on what they thought, their misinterpretation. And that's how we get Christianity as we know it. Christianity, let me correct something. The Christians never called themselves Christians.
Amen.
They were known as those who were in the way. Now, here's the thing. To be called a Christian was like being called a derogatory term.
Yeah, the N word.
Right, the N word. And so here we are, 2023, we still have people professing to be Christians out of ignorance. For too many of us, we have a spiritual system that has been delivered to us by ignorant people. When I say ignorant, I'm not throwing a stone. That means to not know. So now you go back 300. How far can you? This is my challenge to each of you. If source was in the beginning, how far back can you go to find it? And the most antiquitous people that I find are the people on the continent. So I can go back 10,000 years, 26,000 years, 50,000 years. And I go back far enough that I see no Europeans. I see nothing except people from the continent. And so I'm saying to all of us, we must put it on a timeline. And if you can't validate it on the timeline, if you can't find the individual on the timeline, then it's a story. Now, stories are powerful. Stories have their place. The problem is when you take the characters of the story and you celebrate the character more than you celebrate the message. It's the messenger that's getting in the way, not the message. Because the same message that was given to us by what they call Jesus is the same message that we found from Peru, Asar. If you go back in antiquity, you'll find these messages run true, but the characters may change. Now, I hope I answered your question on that.
You did, and it's really causing me to really think about some things. You just said something. You know how there's a natural resistance. I have, I guess, been considered a radical most of my so-called Christian life. But the one thing that I really, quote unquote, rebelled against was the image, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed, right? I never could get to that Jesus, right? So there's always been a conflict there for me. But yeah, I guess I'm just gonna have to study, show myself approved.
That's right, and that's a challenge too. So if you look behind me, there's an image of a what you could say a black Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Some people think by just changing the images, it makes everything all right. But people can put up a black Jesus, but still have a westernized, Eurocentric worldview.
Okay, so my question. That's really where I'm wrestling this morning. It's like if we have been conditioned to think a certain way, our ancestors didn't think like that. We never thought slavery was okay because we didn't remain in that system. So I'm wondering what is happening now that we have acclimated so that spirit doesn't rise. And maybe it does because I'm listening at your teaching, you're out here. So evidently that spirit is still at work, that spirit that says, this is who you are, this is who you are. And until we can really accept who we are, it's like you're saying, we can't show forth the glory.
Right.
Because it will too be a counterfeit. It will too be a story. So thank you this morning. I'm going to leave it there.
And you said something that was important. Most of us just define ourselves by what we do. But when Moses was asking source, who shall I say sent me? It's the same question, the same way you should respond when people say, who are you? I am that I am.
Yeah.
That's it. And you become what you need to be. You don't get fixated and you don't get defined by the simplicity of being a male or a black male or a black woman or whatever you are using to define yourself. If it limits you until you can understand that you are a divine spiritual being having a human experience, a person of color. All right. So I hope something has been said this morning that's been uplifting and encouraging.